Why should I believe Christianity, and does Christianity really work? The first one that I've mentioned is written by James N. Anderson, and he specializes in philosophical theology, religious epistemology, and Christian apologetics at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's the author of that book. And, of course, this whole series is one that he is editing, and so we're going to be talking about that today. Dr. James Anderson, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Kerby. Good to be here.
I might also mention there are two James N. Andersons, which I did not know till I went to your blog. So you're the one that is at Reformed Theological Seminary, right?
That is right.
Yes. Well, again, I just thought I'd mention that in case people type in your name. Although we do have a link to your blog post. We have information about these books. And before we get into the specifics, talk about the series, because I was very impressed. These are the kinds of questions that we find ourselves oftentimes trying to address, and we bring different guests in to begin to address those issues and try to answer some of those questions. So we really are talking about a whole series of books that are some of the classical questions that people oftentimes have about this area of worldview and apologetics, aren't they?
That's right. And what we've really tried to do with this series is to pick out 10 questions that are commonly asked by skeptics in the Western world. The sort of questions that if you ask someone, well, why don't you believe in Christianity? What's the problem with Christianity? They would raise an issue like the problem of evil or the challenges of evolution or something along those lines. And we wanted to come up with a series that would address 10 major issues and do it in a way that avoided Christian jargon, in-house talk, technical philosophical talk, and were addressed directly to skeptics and other unbelievers. That was the goal of the series.
So again, does Christianity really work? Why should I believe in Christianity? Why is there evil in the world? Hasn't science shown that we don't need a God? Is there really only one way to God? Why do I personally experience evil and suffering? Why does the God of the Old Testament seem so violent and hateful? Some of those conversations we've had today here on Point of View and in the past on Point of View. So again, those are great opportunities to really begin to dig in. And I referred to your book as one that really kind of gets us into this issue of worldview, because that is really important. So talk for us about this idea as you are talking about these series of questions, how important it might be to really begin to understand your own worldview and then the worldview of individuals that you might be witnessing to. Right.
Well, most of the books in the series deal with specific issues like the problem of evil or God in the Old Testament, but we wanted to include one that, rather than being on the defensive, would make a positive case for a Christian worldview. Why should you believe Christianity at all? What are some of the positive reasons? And I ended up writing that one. I was very eager and enthusiastic to do that, because what I wanted to do was to take an explicitly worldview approach to the defense of Christianity. Because I think there are many books out there that make a case for Christianity, but they do it in a rather piecemeal fashion. Sure. And I wanted to do it in a way that communicated that Christianity is an integrated, all-encompassing, holistic worldview, and that if you're going to understand it, and if you're going to evaluate it and understand why it makes sense, you need to see it in worldview terms alongside all the other competing worldviews that are out there.
Well, it's important to kind of step back. You talk about that sometimes a picture, you use the example of Claude Monet, for example, when you were at the National Gallery, you find that sometimes the way to really understand Impressionist is to stand far enough back to see what is taking place. Likewise, if Christianity is a worldview, we need to understand that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and you really need to begin to look at Christianity as a whole rather than at some of those specific elements of that whole, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why in the book, after explaining what a worldview is in general terms and why we need to see Christianity as a worldview, I take an entire chapter just to lay out what the Christian worldview is, what is it that Orthodox Christians believe, to put it out in a way that is going to be, I hope, intelligible to an unbeliever before I even get into any of the reasons why you should believe it, because I think you need to understand the big picture of Christianity before you can understand each of the individual doctrines that make it up.
I might just mention that we have information about these books on our website. You may be able to find them in your local bookstore, but we certainly have links there as well. And each one of them are about 200 plus pages. It's a great resource for you to have. It would be great for you to teach through in a class. And one of the things I found very helpful before we get more into the Christian worldview is just to talk about how to evaluate worldviews in general. You talk about the consistency test. That is it consistent or are there inconsistencies in that worldview? The coherence test, how it coheres together. The explanation test and the evidence test. And these are important to know because sometimes when you're talking to someone, and maybe even interacting or even debating with an individual with a different worldview, sometimes the best thing you can do is encourage them to apply some of those tests to their own worldview and see whether it stands the test of time.
Yeah, that's right. I hope that the chapter on worldview will not only help Christians to understand Christianity as a worldview, but also help them to evaluate the other worldviews that they come into, and that also non-Christian readers will start to think more reflectively and critically about their own worldview.
Well, we're going to come back after the break and spend a little bit of time talking about how to apply that Christian worldview, and then we're going to ask that question, does Christianity really work? That is written by William Edgar, but again, editor for this is James Anderson, and again, it is a series called The Big Ten. We have information about 2 of these books, but you can find out more as you go to the website. And you might remember, many of us, of course, remember Francis Schaeffer. Dr. Francis Schaeffer wrote a book called He is There and He is Not Silent. So we're going to talk about God is there, God is not silent, God is with us, and then move on to some of the practical applications of this as well. So I think you'll appreciate this conversation. It is worldview, apologetics, a fair amount of theology involved as well, and this is very important so that you will be more equipped to be a good ambassador to our world. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation with James Anderson. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
When is a misstatement or an exaggeration an actual lie? This is hardly a hypothetical question. Critics and media organizations have accused the last 2 presidents and the current one of lying to the American people. You might remember such phrases as Bush lied, people died, and Obama continually lied about Obamacare. Now critics claim that President Trump and his administration frequently lie. When Kellyanne Conway talked about the Bowling Green terrorist massacre, was it a lie? She says it was a slip of the tongue. She meant to say Bowling Green terrorist. For the sake of argument, let's assume she misspoke. If so, it wouldn't be any different than candidate Obama saying he visited 57 states. It's an inaccurate misstatement, but isn't a deliberate lie. Sometimes people misremember an event from a news report. Donald Trump said he remembered thousands of Muslims in New Jersey celebrating 9/11. That did not happen. But that is different from Hillary Clinton telling the media that she arrived in Kosovo under gunfire. It is different from Brian Williams telling people how a soldier rescued him after his helicopter was downed in the Iraq War. Both of them were there and were apparently embellishing their story. President Trump has been accused of exaggerating. While that is certainly true, we should also remember that most presidents are prone to do that, especially when they're getting their facts from their aides. Obama told everyone a devastating tornado destroyed a town and killed 10,000 people. Actually, the death toll was 12 people. Also, Trump isn't the first to engage in hyperbole. Obama said at the Dallas Memorial Service for slain police officers that it is easier to buy a Glock than a book in many communities. We should demand that presidents and their administrations tell the truth, but we shouldn't call them liars just because they misspeak or exaggerate. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Dr. James N. Anderson, a professor who also deals with this whole area of epistemology and apologetics at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, talking about the book at the moment, Why Should I Believe Christianity? A little bit later we'll get into a second book in that series, Does Christianity Really Work? And Dr. Anderson, for just a few minutes, we might want to talk about God is there, this idea that God is there. And recently, we, of course, had Tim Keller on. We, in the past, talked about his book, Making Sense of God, an Invitation to the Skeptical, and even earlier, another book, The Reason for God. We find that even this belief that there's a God is very troubling for the modern mind. So it seems to me that that's one of the starting points in terms of maybe our presuppositions of where we begin if we're going to really try to explain a Christian worldview, don't you think?
Yes, I think that's right. What I say in the book is that God is at the center of the Christian worldview, because God is the foundation of all reality and the explanation for everything else. The Bible itself begins with God. In the beginning, God. And then you have the doctrine of creation. So if you're going to understand the Christian worldview, if you're going to understand the reasons for holding the Christian worldview, then you need to understand what the Bible teaches about God and why it makes sense to believe in such a God.
Well, and again, you even start off with made it very clear that, she didn't believe the Bible and she didn't believe in Jesus, but she didn't even really believe in God. And sometimes I've run into some of those individuals at some of these liberal seminaries, and I just sort of want to say, well, what's the point? Because if you're doing theology, if you're actually preaching from a pulpit, your starting point obviously is God, and if it is not, then I think as you point out in the chapter there, this whole idea of naturalism would then be your starting point, that nature is all that there is, we're just evolutionary products, there's no right or wrong, there's no meaning to history, and we just dance to the tune of DNA. So this is not just a small point, this is really the major watershed, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. If there is no God, if there's no personal creator God, then the universe ultimately has no meaning, no purpose. There are no objective values. And so without God, you have nothing. You have no intelligible, worthwhile universe. You have no worthwhile human life in light of that.
So again, one of the things that people sometimes wonder is, do I need to prove God? How do I deal with this on a day-to-day basis? There used to be an assumption not so long ago that everybody probably believed in God. So whether you had the steps to peace with God or the four spiritual laws or whether you used the Roman road, you sort of started with the assumption that somebody believes in God. That's not necessarily the assumption at all, especially as we, on our Wednesdays, do a millennial roundtable. We're finding out that this may be the most secular generation in American history. You're from Scotland, so you know certainly what it's like in Europe. So how do we get into this conversation about God when sometimes we have individuals that don't accept that initial presupposition?
Well, it is true that our world, or at least our Western societies, have become more secular, and there are more people claiming to be atheists than ever. Although we also have to note that atheism, as we see it today, is a relatively recent phenomenon. It's still a minority view, and the vast majority of human beings throughout history have believed that there is a transcendent creator of some kind or other. But coming into this conversation, we do find a lot of skepticism. But I think my starting point would be that we should take our point of view not from what people say about belief in God, but what the Bible says about belief in God. And my reading of the first chapter of the book of Romans is that God's existence is plain from the created order. Yes. It's very evident that there is a God and that he has certain attributes, and people can see that, but they suppress it. So it's not the case that we have people who look around and honestly come to the belief that there is no God, but rather there's an act of spiritual suppression there to deny what is plainly before their eyes.
I think that's really good because, I do some debates with atheists, and over the years we've had some that call in, and to a person, they all want to just say that really atheism would be the default setting. If it weren't for you Christians and you theologians and you pastors with all your religious dogma, that people would actually grow up in a world without all this religious stuff. to believe that there is no God. And yet, I think the contrary view of that is not only found in Romans 1, it's found out in the world, because you have almost 2 billion people that call themselves Christians. Whether they're all Christian or not, we'll leave that for another day. 1.5 billion Muslims, another billion that would either be Buddhist or Hindu, probably another billion that would be animist. We're incredibly religious, and to say that all of that is due to religious teaching is just the opposite. And if you go back, as I have, and I know other people, Dr. Norm Geist has been on this program talking about looking at some of the biographies of the great atheists, almost to a person, they also describe a time in which they might have believed in God but then rejected that. So again, it gets back to Romans 1 of suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. But let's move on to the chapter on God is not silent, because another part of that is we wouldn't know a lot about God in terms of our own personal experience. But the good news is that God stepped into time, both in the person of Jesus Christ as well as in his word, to actually help us understand who he is, what his character is, and how we are to live here on this planet.
Yes, once you've made your case for the existence of God, as I do in the book, and not just a sort of blank deity, a distant deity, but rather a personal creator God, the next question then is, has this God communicated with us? And I argue that if there is a personal creator God who has given us the gift of language and the gift of being able to enter into loving relationships with other persons, then we should expect God to speak to us. We should expect our Creator to communicate with us. And if that is the case, then we need to ask the question, where? Where has God spoken? And then really that leads us into an argument over the different claims that monotheistic religions make about where God has spoken, whether it's in the Old Testament or the Old and New Testament or in the Quran or in the Book of Mormon. And we need to examine these different candidates for a special revelation to see which one really holds up to scrutiny as the Word of God.
Well, again, we again can actually spend some time, as you said, ask where has God spoken, but we can use just our reasonable evaluation to look at a couple of things that you talk about. First of all, you talk about prophecies, and that's where, again, the Bible, especially the Old Testament prophecies fulfilled in a person, Jesus Christ, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and other prophecies are being situation, then the problem and the solution and the promises made and the promises kept. So if you look at those 3 P's, that shows you again that the Bible stands apart from these other pieces of religious literature, doesn't it?
That's right. I mean, really, when you look at the competitors to the Bible, none of them comes anywhere close to giving the kind of coherent view of history, a coherent view of God, a meaningful diagnosis of the human problem and the solution to that problem. And so I encourage skeptics, go look at the Quran, look at the Book of Mormon, make the comparison with the Bible, because I'm confident that you will see that the Bible stands alone as a credible revelation from God.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at one other piece, and that is certainly he is there, he is not silent, but also God with us. And this is a situation which we find ourselves as well, having, of course, the revelation in the person of Jesus Christ. So there are some really great material that we are trying to put in your hands, and this is part of what's called the Big Ten, Critical Questions Answered. It is a Christian apologetic series, and we've been talking about why should I believe Christianity. We'll spend a little more time on that. And then, does Christianity really work? Some others that you might want to know more about. Why is there evil in the world? Hasn't science shown that we don't need God? Is there really only one way to God? Why do I personally experience evil and suffering? Why does the God of the Old Testament seem violent and hateful? And I believe some others that will be coming out. Why should I trust the Bible? How could a loving God send anyone to hell? If Christianity is so good, why are Christians so bad? So just answering some of the most important, kind of fundamental questions that you will run into. And the good news is that these are available, and we have information about this on our website, which is pointofview.net. As you click on the picture there as well of Dr. James Anderson, you will see that will take you to his website about analogical thoughts, I should call it, as well as we have information about the book, Why Should I Believe Christianity, which is available in paperback. And then, of course, you can find out from there the series that I think you will find very helpful in the future. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. James N. Anderson as we continue our conversation about why should I believe Christianity. But we need to take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Alaska. You've always wanted to go, and now is the time. Trade the sounds of being stuck in traffic for the screech of an eagle and the deep-throated horn of a first-class cruise liner. Experience the natural beauty of America's last frontier with a literal boatload of like-minded new friends. Best of all, you get to hear from and ask questions of Kerby, Penna, and Kelly. August 5th through 12th this year. Holland America's New Amsterdam is scheduled to take you to the colorful historical ports of Juneau, Skagway, Ketchikan, and the unparalleled experience of scenic Glacier Bay. No, Al Gore, the ice hasn't all melted, and it's gorgeous. Grab your passport, get all the details at pointofview.net/Alaska, or request a brochure at 800-347-5151. Cruise with the crew of Point of View. pointofview.net/Alaska and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. James N. Anderson. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. This may be one of those hours where I think you'll just sit back and listen, but if you do want to join us, feel free to do so. A second hour, we'll certainly have, I think, a robust discussion about a number of issues, but wanted to, again, educate you about these issues of worldview and apologetics. This new series, The Big Ten, Critical Questions Answered. And I wanted to, at least, Dr. Anderson, spend a little more time on one other chapter in your book, Why Should I Believe Christianity? And that is God with us, because we certainly can understand a lot about God from his creation, even in our own conscience, certainly from God's word, but certainly we get a very good picture of the character of God and an understanding of how we are to live in this world in the person of Jesus Christ. So what can we learn about this in terms of the incarnation and how this can, again, help us not only develop a Christian worldview, but use this in an apologetic way as we share our faith with others around us?
Well, that's right, that we have to recognize that God has spoken not only through the Scriptures, but he has spoken personally through his Son, Jesus Christ. And that is another of the very distinctive, defining claims of the Christian worldview, not only that there is a God and that God has spoken, but that God has spoken through a person. In fact, it is God himself, the second person of the Trinity, who has taken on a human nature and lived among us and made atonement for our sins. So if we're going to talk about the Christian worldview and we're going to persuade people why it makes sense, then we have to talk about the central role that Jesus plays and who this person, Jesus of Nazareth, truly is.
Well, and it seems to me that as Paul, the Apostle Paul, is trying to really kind of set forth the case for Christianity, in 1 Corinthians 15, he takes us down to the resurrection. And certainly the claims that Jesus makes are outrageous if they were not true. But the verification for those claims comes with the resurrection. Yet in one of your chapters, you spend a little bit of time talking about David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher who was skeptical about miracles. But this is perhaps the greatest miracle, if you can imagine, a person being killed in a tomb for 3 days and then appears to his disciples as Lord of life and appears to many others. That is the demonstration that we have victory over death.
Yes, the resurrection has so many profound theological implications and existential implications for us. And it's not just any miracle. As one Christian philosopher put it, the resurrection is a super miracle. It stands alone. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, of course, it's central in the preaching of the apostles. As they go around the world of that day, sharing the good news of Jesus, they place a lot of emphasis on how Jesus' message is confirmed by the resurrection, how this gives hope of eternal life. But it's interesting that they don't use the resurrection really as a proof of his deity. And in fact, we know from the Gospels that his disciples recognized his deity before his death and resurrection. So there must have been something about Jesus, what he said, what he did, that persuaded them that he was more than a mere man, that he was, in fact, the Son of God, as he claimed to be.
Well, again, you had Old Testament prophecies fulfilled in his life, and no one other in that regard. Of course, you had the miracles that Jesus performed, and of course, most importantly, what some people call the super miracle of the resurrection. So this is all part of an excellent book that you have written, Why Should I Believe Christianity? But I thought for just a few minutes I might pull some other material out of another book, which is by one of your colleagues, William Edgar, who is a professor of apologetics at Westminster Theological Seminary there in Philadelphia. This book is really well done as well. Does Christianity really work? Because some people say, okay, that's great, but now the so what question. And the so what question, I think, takes us into, well, does Christianity really work? And one of his chapters deals with the issue of social reform. And if you begin to even go past the disciples into the first century or so of Christianity, you recognize, as we've talked about with Dr. Rodney Stark in his book, The Triumph of Christianity, that people believe Christianity was true because of the way in which Christians were acting. They were showing compassion. They were willing to reach out to the poor and the hungry. They were willing to minister to those that had a plague. They were willing to go and die a martyr's death because of their belief. So in some respects, when people ask, does Christianity really work, we can point right back to some of the first centuries of Christianity to give very good evidence of that, can't we?
That's right. That's right. The apostles obviously used apologetics. They reasoned with people. They provided evidence. But what really captured people's attention was the lives that the early Christians lived, that they had been transformed, that they were willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of this person, Jesus Christ, whom they were preaching. And so there's a sense in which there's a verbal apologetic for Christianity, but there's also a visible apologetic in the lives of transformed believers. And certainly when we look at our own lives, we can be very challenged as to whether our lives provide the same kind of powerful apologetic as the lives of the earliest Christians.
Well said. One of the other parts of his chapter there deals with the slave issue. And so whether you look at William Wilberforce, whether you look at the abolition movement in the United States, whatever it might be, you can see that Christians recognized that they had a social responsibility in that sense, that when they would see an evil in the world, whether it was slavery in the 19th century, whether it's civil rights in the 20th century, whether it's sexual trafficking right now in the 21st century, whatever it might be, Christians oftentimes were at the forefront of some of those social reformations because they recognize that each individual is created in the image of God, and we cannot allow these kinds of things to take place.
That is right. The Christian worldview provides an understanding of human beings that gives them inherent dignity and worth and provides the strongest motivation for seeking the welfare of human beings, for seeking justice in the world, for addressing social ills, for improving health care, and so forth. And I think that the Christian worldview is really unique in that regard, in the high view that it has of human life, that provides this spur to do good, even at the cost of one's own life, if necessary, for the sake of the other.
You mentioned healthcare. Just in passing, I thought I might say that as an individual who's a deacon and oftentimes has a responsibility to go into a hospital, and of course I did that even as a private citizen as well, I have yet to go into a humanist hospital, an atheist hospital. I'm always struck by the hospitals that we talk about have the word Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever it might be on their names, and that's not just by accident, because when you look whether it's in the first century with the Christians dealing and be willing to even at the risk of their own lives help those who have the plague or who were thrown out on the streets, or whether you look at the whole growth of the modern kind of scientific and medical movement that Christians were involved with, that is something that, again, testifies to the fact that if we really take seriously our biblical points of view, then we need to treat other individuals with dignity and respect and care and compassion, because they are also individuals created in the image of God.
That is right. It is no coincidence that so many hospitals in our nation and around the world have been set up by Christians with a Christian worldview, with a Christian mission. And we want to be careful here. We don't want to suggest that Christians are the only ones who are doing these good works, because, of course, there are atheistic doctors and nurses who are doing wonderful work. But I would say that when they do that work, they're actually doing it in spite of their worldview rather than because of it. And in a sense, they're borrowing from a Christian worldview in order to make sense of the sort of things that they do.
That's one of the phrases I use so often, so it's great that you use that, because oftentimes we'll see people doing such good things, but again, it's not because it's necessarily coming from their biblical worldview, because they don't have a biblical worldview. They have a naturalistic or pantheistic worldview, but they're in some cases borrowing it from us as well. We come back from the break. Let me just go in real quickly to a couple of other sections in his book, one about persistent sins like temptation and even and besetting sins like addiction, because again, I think we can see the truthfulness of the gospel, not only in God's word, not only in the person of Jesus Christ, but in the lives of individuals, and how as individuals who are really wanting to take their Christian worldview into the marketplace and into the hospitals and into the fields of education or wherever it might be, we're seeing a very positive difference. And again, this is just one of many books in the series. We talked about earlier, Why Should I Believe in Christianity, written by Dr. James Anderson. And we're at the moment talking about just a little bit more of the second book in that series, Does Christianity Really Work? By Dr. William Edgar. And there are 10 books that will eventually be out there, and we wanted to alert you to those and encourage you to use those in your own personal study, maybe in your small groups, and even for those of you that are pastors would like to teach on it. There's just great material here. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. James Anderson right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Mary Beth Janalski was hired by the Catholic Diocese of Gary, Indiana, to be the principal for Andrian High School. Her contract specifically noted that the job of principal of a Catholic high school is a ministry. It went on to explain that such a ministry is witnessed not only in the manner in which the principal performs his or her tasks, but also in the example the principal sets for the teachers and students both in and outside the school and parish. Further, the contract noted that the principal coordinates faith-building opportunities within the school community, oversees the theology program, and ensures that the Catholic faith is integrated with the learning process in coordination with the campus chaplain. So when Janalski sued the diocese over her termination, the question became whether the diocese could choose its ministerial leader and therefore be exempt from employment laws that would have otherwise presented a legal burden to the school. The court found Janalski to meet the definition of minister, and that the diocese was entitled to use the same ministerial exception that permits churches and other religious organizations to ensure its ministry is not hindered by those it believes may not fully advance its ministry objectives. Religious freedom means that religious ministries should be able to direct their religious mission, which includes staffing decisions, without interference by the state. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If not, we're going to have lots of opportunities in the second hour to interact on a variety of issues in the news, but wanted you to know about these books, Why Should I Believe Christianity, as well as Does Christianity Really Work? And we're talking with Dr. James Anderson for just a few more minutes. In the chapters by William Edgar, he talks about temperamental inclinations, that is, persistent sins, and then also talks about begetting sins, and that is addiction. And it seems to me that even in these particular hard cases with individuals addicted to drugs and alcohol, gambling, whatever it might be, The Christian message certainly has a great deal to provide, and the power of the Holy Spirit in an individual that has accepted Jesus Christ can make all the difference in the world, can it?
Yes, that's right. I love these two chapters in Dr. Edgar's book in particular because not only do they serve an apologetic purpose of explaining what the reality of Christianity looks like in a person's life and the power of Christianity to transform, but also they're a great encouragement for Christians as well because we all wrestle with sin in various respects. And it's just very encouraging material about the role of the Holy Spirit in the life of a believer, but also the fact that our hope is not in full deliverance from sin and suffering in this life, but our hope is in the resurrection, and our hope is in the new creations and the new earth, and that is ultimately the solution to the problem of sin and suffering in our lives.
Well, and again, because the title is, Does Christianity Really Work?, we can really point that out. Of course, one of the individuals that endorses this particular book is Johnny Erickson Todd, who's been on the program with us before. But even apart from that, when we look at some of the things, Dr. Anderson, that have been documented, that those faith-based prisons do better than the institutional prisons, that those faith-based drug addiction programs are more effective than some of the government different programs on whether it's drugs or alcohol, we can really, again, just almost empirically see the truthfulness of the gospel and the power of the Holy Spirit working in an individual life.
Yes, and the evidence speaks for itself, and so many testimonies can be multiplied. And the irony is, it's almost as though even if Christianity were false, it still seems to transform people's lives. So even from an atheist perspective, I think you should be promoting, Christianity and these sort of faith-based programs because of the transforming effect that they have in people's lives.
Well, just before we run out of time, I wanted Dr. Anderson for just a minute maybe to talk about the series for just a minute. You are one of the editors, and this is a series that I would, as I've heard you already describe, is something we can do for study. But I've also talked a little bit about how I think this could be used by pastors for sermons. It could be used by individuals that have a Sunday school class or a Bible fellowship. Somebody has a small group. So could you, for just a minute, kind of give us an overview of the series and what you think could be used by individuals if they want to use that in their small group or in their Bible study or maybe even in their church?
Yes, I think that these books could be used in a number of ways. As I said earlier, the main audience is unbelievers. We want to have an evangelistic thrust to the series because we want to provide books that we hope Christians will give to their non-Christian friends and say, this addresses your concerns, so let's talk about it. But also, these are questions that Christians themselves wrestle with. We have doubts. The unbelieving world criticizes Christianity, and we need answers for ourselves. We need to be equipped to give an answer to those who ask us to give the reason for the hope that we have. So I think these books will be good resources for believers, for some seasoned believers, for new believers, as you say, for pastors who are looking for illustrations, for sermons. I think there could be multiple uses, and certainly for discussion groups. These are very accessible and digestible books. They're not long. They're written in a very easy, informal way with lots of illustrations and material like that. So I think they're very accessible, and with 6 to 8 chapters each, you could easily see something like a Sunday school series or a discussion group series being based on one of these books.
It seems to me also that, as I mentioned just a minute ago, I've got these 2 books, but I know some others would be coming out soon. How many are out, and when can we expect to see the whole series finished?
Well, that's a good question. Our aim is to try and get 2 volumes out every year. So we've got a schedule, and we've got authors lined up for nearly all of the books in the series now. So that's the schedule we're working with. Of course, the best laid plans of mice and men mean that sometimes we have to adjust our schedule. But that's basically what we're aiming for, to see 2 more books in the series out each year.
Well, and again, I think the next ones that I know about are why is there evil in the world? Hasn't science shown that we don't need God? But we've also mentioned some others. Is there is really only one way to God? Why do we personally experience evil and suffering? Why does the God of the Old Testament seem so violent and hateful? So pass on to your other writers, since you are the series editor. I'd love to chat with some of the others because, as you can probably tell by now, we at Point of View love to talk about worldview and apologetics, and these are just perfect resources for that. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have Todd Starnes with us. He, of course, has been on Fox News Radio for more than a decade. You probably have heard his daily commentaries. We also, of course, from time to time, publish some of his comments and some of his Viewpoints commentary. This new book, which is kind of fun, we'll spend a half an hour with him and then open up for your comments or questions, The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. I guess we're part of that basket of deplorables, and he has a lot of fun with some of the comments, and we'll be talking about some of these religious liberty issues in particular. As you heard us talk about on Friday, very concerned about a decision that came down in the state of Washington from the Washington Supreme Court, which ruled against Baronelle Stutzman, that woman who indeed was very friendly and actually had employed people that were homosexuals in her work and actually had provided resources for them, but kind of drew the line when it came to, could I really do a floral arrangement for a same-sex ceremony? And that led to her not only being sued, but now it is quite possible that she will not only lose her business, but be bankrupted. And so that's one of the issues we'll talk about with him and many others. And that is my, again, reminder that if you did not on Friday deal with our action alert, let me encourage you to go to that right now at pointofview.net. On the right-hand corner, we do know that the President Donald Trump, has signed a number of executive orders, and one that he was planning on signing was a religious liberty executive order. Well, it's all the more, I think, important and certainly urgent that he do so in light of what we've just heard from the Washington State Supreme Court that ruled against Baronelle Stutzman simply because she did not want to do a same-sex commitment ceremony floral arrangement, and she's just the latest victim in all those particular cases that we've talked about, a baker, a florist, a photographer, and on and on. So again, this is one of those concerns that we have, and so we have given you an opportunity to simply go to our website, pointofview.net, go to the right-hand corner there, it says Take Action, and we just encourage you to see the note that we have put together. You can modify it any way you want, and that it will then be sent on to the president, and that's your way of letting him know that you believe in this issue of religious liberty and believe that this executive order, which we've seen kind of an advanced draft copy, is exactly what we need. So again, we've given you that opportunity, and if you have not had a chance to go to the website and fill out that particular action item, we encourage you to do so. We come back, we're going to be talking with Todd Starnes, The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. Coming up right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily, and love you guys, and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As we've been promoting, we now have an opportunity to talk with Todd Starnes. Of course, you know him as a commentator for Fox News Radio, and also have read his column, which is read by millions of individuals. Individual that has written 4 books, including Godless America, and this particular one, The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. Might also mention our friend George Barn has been on the program with us many times, has also included Todd Starnes as one of the very significant media influencers for evangelical Christians in the 2016 presidential election. So, Todd Starnes, welcome to Point of View.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Great to be with you, Kerby.
And I might just mention, we posted your columns on a regular basis, so it's not like we haven't had a lot of exposure to you, but now it's great. And I thought I'd pick it up since you deal with it in Chapter 4 of your book, is the decision by the Washington Supreme Court against Barronelle Stutzman. And this is of great concern to all of us, but you have a section which you entitle The Baptist Flower Shop Lady, Public Enemy Number 1. And I could tell by looking at your endnotes that you've actually had some conversation with her. But what about this? We seem to find that every time there is a challenge that is being brought, whether it's with a baker or a florist or a photographer or an innkeeper, that it almost always seems to be going against Christians. So how should we think about these particular decisions, especially the one that came down just the other day out of the Washington Supreme Court?
Well, that question is like a Vidalia onion. You have to peel all the layers because there are a lot of things to talk about regarding this particular issue. First and foremost, I think my book was a warning to Christians across America that just because Donald Trump is in the White House doesn't mean the fight for religious liberty is over.
Yes.
This is a fight that is going to go on for quite some time. And that brings me to layer number 2, which is the courts. You know, we focus so much on the Supreme Court and who the president nominates for the Supreme Court that we forget that the president also has to appoint judges to the lower courts. And that's where a lot of these decisions are being rendered. So it's just as important to pay attention to who the president puts on those appellate courts as much as he does the Supreme Court. But ultimately, Kerby, I believe that we as Christians have to be willing to stand together and put aside our differences to understand that we have to fight Methodist and Baptist and Presbyterian and Pentecostal together, side by side, to defend religious liberty.
One of the things we do every Friday is we have Kelly Shackelford here of First Liberty and Penna Dexter, and it is amazing how many times we will be quoting from you because you're talking about Kim Davis or you're talking about Coach Kennedy. In this case, we're talking about Barronelle Stutzman, or so many of the other columns that you have written, which now make their way into this book, The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. And frankly, if it weren't for people like Todd Starnes and maybe Point of View and Kelly Shackelford and Jay Sekulow and a handful of others, most people would not know of all the intrusions through this threat of religious liberty. So, as you said, we've got to get involved because if not, a lot of the world isn't even aware of some of these issues.
I can't think of a more deplorable person outside of myself than Kelly Shackelford. I think we're the deplorable of the deplorables, as they say. But, going back to that comment that Hillary Clinton made, I thought it was quite revealing because it indicates, I think when you unpack what she was talking about, what's happening post-election makes sense with all of the violent unrest across the country. Because the word deplorable wasn't the word I was concerned about. It was the word irredeemable. Hillary Clinton, in her mind, in her liberal mind, seems to believe those of us who cling to our guns and our religion, as President Obama once so eloquently stated, people who cherish traditional American values, our belief system is so egregious it's beyond redemption. And I think that's why you're seeing all of this outrage and these protests in the streets, and quite frankly, why they become violent, because they truly do believe that the traditional America, that there's something wrong with that concept.
Yeah, President Obama referred to us as bitter clingers, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called us irredeemable. And you have if you will, a ringside seat, because early on in your book, you talk about a good old Southern boy living in New York City. By the way, I went to graduate school in Connecticut, so I can relate very well to what you're talking about. And so when you have vegetarian neighbors and you bring out some pork butt or whatever, you kind of begin to realize that there's a real culture clash, isn't there?
Oh, yes. When I moved to New York, I found a place in Brooklyn, so I live right smack in the middle of a commune of hipsters, vegetarian hipsters. And, I went early on, Kerby, I sort of felt out of place, so I went to the wardrobe department at Fox, and I explained my predicament. And they said, well, Todd, you should go get yourself some skinny jeans. And Kerby, it took a shoehorn and a tub of butter to wiggle my big toe in those things. It turned out not to be a good look for me.
Not very good look. And again, when you show up and you're drinking two for tea and Rush Limbaugh's tea and all sorts of other things, you just definitely kind of stand out, don't you?
So let me explain this. In New York City, they have block parties, and you could have maybe 100, 200 people living on a street block, in the apartments. And so in the summertime, they'll open up the fire hydrants and they'll block off the street so you can have cookouts or whatever. And I felt like, to be neighborly, I should bring something, so I ordered a case of Rush Limbaugh's iced tea. And I figured if I had to drink their Kool-Aid, they could sip my iced tea.
And brought some food that they are not used to seeing as well. So, but again, this was one of the reasons that you wanted to be there, kind of get a ringside seat of what was happening there in New York City. And of course, you interact with that every single day. And isn't it possible to say that there are such differences in America between the left coast and the west coast and middle America that if it weren't for you, they might, in that particular neighborhood, have never had any contact with this whole basket of deplorables, right?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I tell a story in the book about Bernie Sanders, who held a campaign rally in my neighborhood. This shows you how far to the left my neighborhood is. And anyway, I didn't know where the rally was. I knew it was in our local park. And someone suggested just follow the smell of patchouli oil. That's the hippie oil. And so sure enough, I did, and there they were, and just a whole mess of them. And so anyway, I saw they were selling T-shirts, and so I thought, I want one of those T-shirts. So I went up to the person, and I said, I'd like a T-shirt. And he said, well, it's $20. I said, well, I don't have $20. He goes, well, I can't give you a T-shirt. And I said, but aren't you a socialist? I want something that you have that I don't have. I told someone I'd never seen so much capitalism going on at a socialist rally.
That's really good. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about safe spaces, microaggressions, and snowflakes, because that's another theme in your book. But we need to take one of those mandatory breaks. You're a radio guy. You know all about that. So let's take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with Todd Starnes as we talk about his book, The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
When is a misstatement or an exaggeration an actual lie? This is hardly a hypothetical question. Critics and media organizations have accused the last two presidents and the current one of lying to the American people. You might remember such phrases as Bush lied, people died, and Obama continually lied about Obamacare. Now critics claim that President Trump and his administration frequently lie. When Kellyanne Conway talked about the Bowling Green terrorist massacre, was it a lie? She says it was a slip of the tongue. She meant to say Bowling Green terrorist. For the sake of argument, let's assume she misspoke. If so, it wouldn't be any different than candidate Obama saying he visited 57 states. It's an inaccurate misstatement, but isn't a deliberate lie. Sometimes people misremember an event from a news report. Donald Trump said he remembered thousands of Muslims in New Jersey celebrating 9/11. That did not happen, but that is different from Hillary Clinton telling the media that she arrived in Kosovo under gunfire. It is different from Brian Williams telling people how a soldier rescued him after his helicopter was downed in the Iraq War. Both of them were there and were apparently embellishing their story. President Trump has been accused of exaggerating. While that is certainly true, we should also remember that most presidents are prone to do that, especially when they're getting their facts from their aides. Obama told everyone a devastating tornado destroyed a town and killed 10,000 people. Actually, the death toll was 12 people. Also, Trump isn't the first to engage in hyperbole. Obama said at the Dallas Memorial Service for slain police officers that it is easier to buy a Glock than a book in many communities. We should demand that presidents and their administrations tell the truth, but we shouldn't call them liars just because they misspeak or exaggerate. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Todd Starnes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212 with Fox News Radio and the author of this book, The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. And Todd, I know that you love war movies, Saving Private Ryan and Patton and The Great Escape and The Patriot and others. And so you think about this greatest generation that fought in World War II. What we have today are microaggressions and snowflakes. How did that happen?
You know, Kerby, it's sad, but we've gone from the greatest generation to the entitlement generation. And I think a lot of this started with moms and dads coddling this generation that we've come to know as the millennials, teaching them that there's really no such thing as winning or losing. Everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a trophy. And as a result of that, you have a generation that believes that they're entitled to everything, that they don't have to put in a hard day's work. Not all of the people in that generation are like that, but there are enough that it's becoming a problem, and it's especially evident on our university campuses, which have really sort of become the breeding ground for this issue. You know, when I first heard of the word microaggression, I thought, well, you know, I remember my mother having those when I was a child, and she would take a BC powder and a tab, and
or there's something that the Centers for Disease Control was talking about.
No, it wasn't.
It is just amazing. You know, I might just mention in each one of your chapters you have marching orders, and since we're on that for a minute, let's talk about that because we can sit here, as you well know, Todd, and curse the darkness, or we can light some lamps. And it seems to me that this would be an opportunity for parents to consider whether or not they want to send their student that's about ready to graduate from high school to secular U down the street or go to a Christian campus, also to participate in a student ministry, but also make some noise because we are starting to see right now in some of these schools where the alumni are starting to say, you know, if this continues on, we're not going to send any more money here. We're not going to send our students here. And some of these universities, let me just use University of Missouri, for example, as one example, are finding fewer individuals coming into the freshman class. So there are some things that we can do rather than just wring our hands about what's happening. And that's really what the premise of your book is, that there is a lot of work to do. We have an election, but now the real work begins, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. Not only are there some great stories and encouraging and inspirational stories, but after every chapter, we do provide marching orders, things that you can do to make your town, your community, your school, your neighborhood, you can make that community great again. And these are things that don't cost any money. You know, it's just for, you know, one of the most important areas that we need to pay attention to is our public school system, because that is the engine that the liberals are using to really re-engineer socially our country. That's why we have seen such a massive shift on major cultural issues is our public school system. So I really encourage moms and dads to get involved. And beyond moms and dads, taxpayers, you know, you may not have a child, but you pay taxes, and your tax dollars are being used to fund that school. So we all have some skin in the game, as they say here, and that's why I wrote the book. You know what? We're not supposed to be out there burning things down and beating people up. I demonstrate in the book how we can be what I call happy warriors, how we can get out there and stand for our beliefs and make a difference.
Well, again, you have that chapter called Indoctrination 101. And again, first of all, get involved in your child's school, assist with extracurricular activities, consider, you know, private school, Christian schools, those kinds of things. But I would also encourage some of our listeners to say, maybe it's time to run for the school board. You can certainly do a great deal of good simply by being able to head off some of these kind of crazy ideas that come down almost every year from some of the teachers' colleges and say, you know, we really are here to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, and anything else is nice if we can fit it in, but let's make sure we are able to do the basics first. And it seems to me, Todd, that's just another way in which we can get involved by, if we don't run for office, at least get the kind of people we want in office so that we can turn some of this around.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, we have a storied history in America of churches, of pastors being involved in the political process. It just seems like over the past decade or so, ministers have really taken churches out of the political arena and out of the public arena, the public marketplace. And I believe that as a result of abdicating that authority and responsibility, I believe that we are worse off as a country because of that. You know, I go back to the early days of the country, Kerby, where pastors used to preach sermons on election day. People would go to church before they went to go cast their vote. And beyond that, when the Founding Fathers were having trouble rounding up an army to fight the British, they went to a Baptist preacher in Charleston, South Carolina, who they asked to go out into the countryside and help round up people with his passionate sermons on freedom. So we have a wonderful history, and I sort of tell some of those stories in the book, again, to give people an idea of it's okay to be involved in politics and still be a Christian in good standing.
It's really good. Just before I let you go, one other issue I thought I would put on the table since I'm going to talk about it in the last half hour, and that is your chapter on the rise of radical Islam, because we have to recognize that that's one of the challenges. Just each generation, whether it was World War II, had to face fascism. We have to face this issue of radical Islam. And you start the chapter by saying, you know, you sleep a little bit better when you know that an individual who is protecting you has the name Mad Dog.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to put some of the more colorful quotes he has in our book.
Yes, that would definitely make it R-rated or worse. Yes.
They wouldn't be in the Baptist hymnal, I can tell you that much.
But again, this is another challenge, and we up until now just have had difficulty with our previous two presidents having somebody put the phrase radical Islamic terrorist in the same sentence. And there seems to be a problem. If you can't identify the enemy, you're not going to be very good at fighting that enemy. True?
You know, it is true, and we have a president who stood on American soil, or foreign soil rather, and said that America is no longer just a Christian nation. Someone who is apologizing for America being an exceptional nation, and really sort of undermining the Judeo-Christian values that flavored all of our founding documents. So it's been troubling to see this rise of Islam, and we have seen, especially at our public schools, Islam has been given accommodation, especially in our textbooks, while Christianity and Judaism have been marginalized in our textbooks as well. So we've got to fix that, and I think that we need to understand that we have a unique system of government, founded and based on Judeo-Christian values and concepts.
Well, again, the book is entitled The Deplorables Guide to Making America Great Again. As you read through it, you're going to see a lot of familiar territory because we've quoted from Todd Starnes time and time again. We've posted many of his articles, but it pulls all of that together in a way with a number of endnotes, about 200 pages. We have a link so that if you wanted to order it, it's available both in paperback and in Kindle, but I would imagine most of you will be able to find it in your local bookstore. And Todd Starnes, always appreciate your commentaries, and thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Always a pleasure, Kerby. Thank you.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will give you some of those marching orders. One of those we've already given to you, and that is to contact President Trump, which we have already talked about. We have under our action alert today that President Trump has signed several executive orders, including one dealing with the LGBT community. And so it is really important for you now to also not only focus on that, but also to recognize that this religious liberty executive order has yet to be signed. And so many of you perhaps voted for President Trump. Even if you did not, you are certainly, I'm sure, concerned about religious liberty. And you know how we talk about this on a pretty regular basis, of course, every Friday here at Point of View. And so this is one that I think needs to be signed. And it is, I think, illustrated by the fact that we had the word that came down last week from the Washington State Supreme Court against the florist Barronelle Stutzman. I'm going to give you a little more background information on that in just a few minutes. But again, this is why I think it is all the more important for us to contact President Trump, and we've made it very easy for you to do. Please take the time to deal with this action alert because we'll be bringing another one to you tomorrow. So if you have not taken the time to deal with this, please do so, because there are lots of issues happening simultaneously, both in the Trump administration as well as in Congress. And so we want to give you those opportunities to contact, in this case, the president. Last week, we talked about contacting your representative. The week before, it was a U.S. senator. And we're just trying to give you some opportunities here to make your word and your comments and your opinions known. So certainly that is the case. And speaking of letting your opinion be known, let's open up the phones now and give you a chance to join our conversation. Maybe something I've talked about with Todd Starnes would be something you'd like to talk about. That number is 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. We've been talking about his book, The Deplorables Guide, but I'm going to get into a couple of other very important issues right after this.
Alaska. You've always wanted to go, and now is the time. Trade the sounds of being stuck in traffic for the screech of an eagle and the deep-throated horn of a first-class cruise liner. Experience the natural beauty of America's last frontier with a literal boatload of like-minded new friends. Best of all, you get to hear from and ask questions of Kerby, Penna, and Kelly. August 5th through 12th this year. Holland America's New Amsterdam is scheduled to take you to the colorful historical ports of Juneau, Skagway, Ketchikan, and the unparalleled experience of scenic Glacier Bay. No, Al Gore, the ice hasn't all melted, and it's gorgeous. Grab your passport, get all the details at pointofview.net/Alaska. or request a brochure at 800-347-5151. Cruise with the crew of Point of View. pointofview.net/Alaska and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Take some of those phone calls in just a minute, but let me put at least one more thing on the table, which is related to the conversation we've had about Baronelle Stutzman. And again, if you're not familiar with this particular case, woman who turns out is a Southern Baptist, and I picked up that from Todd Starnes' book, also from this article I'm going to read in just a minute, and that may have also weighed in as well, because Rod Dreyer writes about the fact that Denny Burke, who's been on the program with us a couple of times before, he's a Southern Baptist theologian and pastor, teaches at a Southern Baptist college, said that, interesting enough, when I was first asked to give testimony, and that is the testimony having to deal with Baronelle Stutzman's florist case, he said, I thought my role as a Southern Baptist pastor and seminary professor would simply be to enter into the record what Southern Baptists believe about marriage. But that is not at all what it turned out to be. He said, for the entire day, I sat across the table from attorneys representing the Washington Attorney General and the ACLU, two different attorneys, because Ms. Stutzman is being sued by the state and by the gay couple that she once was friends with. These attorneys didn't merely ask me what Southern Baptists believe. They tried to show that what Southern Baptists believe amounts to invidious discrimination. Denny Burke goes on to say, I had to defend not only our denomination's statement of faith, that is the Baptist faith and message, but also resolutions passed by our denomination going back 30 and 40 years. It was hostile questioning intended to discredit what Southern Baptists believe about marriage. They wanted to discredit us so they could discredit her. And make no mistake, once they succeed in punishing her, others will use this precedent to punish the rest of us. And not just Southern Baptists, but any person who dares to act on their belief that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. And what Rod Dreyer points out is Terry Mattingly has even come up with this phrase, the religious right must lose. And the point he's making is they hate us. He says, no, they really hate us. And if you don't see that, the piece by David French that we posted the other day made this case. He said, if you care about the Bill of Rights, the rights of conscience, or even the English language, he says there's a chance that this morning you felt a disturbance in the force. As if the founders cried out in rage and were suddenly silenced. That disturbance was the Washington Supreme Court's oppressive ruling in the state of Washington versus Arlene's Flowers, a case holding that a florist was bound by state law to use her artistic talents to design floral arrangements to celebrate what she viewed as an immoral event, a gay wedding. And so again, once you start looking at all of these issues, you can begin to realize how they are in many particular cases going to make this particular case a frontispiece. And it's all the more reason why we've encouraged you to contact the President of the United States about his executive order dealing with religious liberty, and why we want to follow up very soon with various action items, first to your representative and then to your senators, about various laws that would protect the right of conscience. So those are a few issues that we're going to be talking about, not only today, but certainly throughout the week and over the next couple of weeks. But let's go to some of the phone calls and take your calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to the state of Texas. Lisa, please tell me your story.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. I guess I have a comment. I'm a Gold Star mother from the Rio Grande Valley, so I'm from the Edinburgh area, and I lost my son in Iraq in April the 1st, 2004. The city bestowed the honor of naming their new library and building a library in honor of my son.
Wow.
And he was a man of faith and stood, throughout in Iraq. I talked to the chaplain. Anyway, we got the library built. I remember we were presented by the Baptist Church a plaque where it basically talks about what a hero is and what a follower of God he was, and not ashamed of the gospel. So that hangs there at the foyer as you enter the library. And every year we have a memorial service in which everyone is gathered there, and it is opened up with prayer, and we do the Pledge of Allegiance. And I hear the stories of the things that are going around in the entire United States. I'm very thankful for my little town and the support I've gotten, but I hold it very dear to me, and at the same time, I'm ready, because I know that the same thing could happen to where the city would say that we'd have to take that tribute, his testimony and what he stood for, away because it's hurting somebody else. So I just wanted to say that, there are still places here in the United States where we don't take it for granted. And even though it's the most painful thing I've ever had to endure, I'm very proud of my son and his faith. And thank you.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. First of all, our condolences to you and our appreciation for what your son has done. And if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that I always want to thank anyone that has served in the military, and we'll never be able to thank them enough. We'll never be able to thank your son, obviously, on this side of heaven. But I do thank you for sharing that. And I'm encouraged to hear that there's still places where you can have a prayer as you dedicate a library, and you don't have people for the separation of church and state or the ACLU or the American Humanist Society or whatever it might be challenge what you're doing. So it's good to hear that. But the bottom line is those particular locations are becoming fewer and fewer. That's all the more reason why we need to stand for these issues of religious liberty. So, Lisa, thank you for calling in and sharing that today.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I take some more phone calls, by the way, if you'd like to follow up on that, 1-800-351-1212. Wanted to pick up something else I mentioned at the top of the hour, but I wanted to come back to that. And each course week, we see different people that have died, and we don't obviously have time to talk about everyone, but I thought it might be good to just spend a minute before we take our next break to talk about Norma McCorvey. She was the individual who was the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade. And the Roe is, of course, Jane Roe. Wade was Henry Wade, and this was a case brought actually just a few miles from where we're broadcasting in Dallas. And Roe versus Wade is the 1973 decision that struck down all the various state laws that restricted abortion and essentially legalized abortion in America. It did leave open the possibility that you could restrict third trimester abortions or after viability, but that was certainly one of the most striking things that ever happened. And Norma McCorvey, of course, was then used as sort of the poster person, if you will, for the abortion rights issue, because her and Doe versus Bolton, which was another case, were the two individuals that oftentimes were held out as the reason why we have abortion. But as you may know, because if you've listened to this program, we used to interview Norma McCorvey, she became pro-life. And in her book that she wrote a number of years ago, Won by Love, she talks about how she came from being a person who wanted to get an abortion to a person who was pro-life. And so let me just quote from her book real quickly here. She said, "I was sitting in Operation Rescue's offices when I noticed a fetal development poster. The progression was so obvious. The eyes were so sweet. It hurt my heart just looking at them. I ran outside and it finally dawned on me. Norma, I said to myself, they're right. I had worked with pregnant women for years. I'd been through 3 pregnancies and deliveries myself. I should have known, yet something in that poster made me lose my breath. I kept seeing the picture of that tiny 10-week-old embryo, and I said to myself, that's a baby. It's as if blinders just fell off my eyes, and I suddenly understood the truth. That's a baby." She says, "I felt crushed under the truth of this realization. I had to face up to the awful reality. Abortion wasn't about products of conception. It wasn't about missed periods. It was about children being killed in their mothers' wombs. All those years, I was wrong." So if nothing else, it's just a reminder that we can see conversions taking place. And here, she died this weekend at an assisted facility, 69 years of age, but she started out as, if you will, the illustration of why we need legalized abortion in America. But even she came face to face with the hard truth of what that really meant. And that is certainly one of the striking realities of the abortion issue, and also, I think, a great testimony of the fact that we can still reach individuals with facts and information and with our loving kindness. And, of course, if you've seen pictures of Norma McCorvey, one of the most iconic pictures is of her being baptized by Flip Benham in a swimming pool. So we certainly have seen that as well. And I just thought before she passed on, we might at least spend just a minute talking about the impact that she had on one side of the abortion issue and then later on the other side of the abortion issue. Let's take a break. When we come back, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The Pope spoke out on the issue of Muslim terrorism, and I have some comments about that, so we'll get into those issues, and of course we'll take some more of your phone calls if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Mary Beth Janalski was hired by the Catholic Diocese of Gary, Indiana, to be the principal for Andrean High School. Her contract specifically noted that the job of principal of a Catholic high school is a ministry. It went on to explain that such a ministry is witnessed not only in the manner in which the principal performs his or her tasks, but also in the example the principal sets for the teachers and students both in and outside the school and parish. Further, the contract noted that the principal coordinates faith-building opportunities within the school community, oversees the theology program, and ensures that the Catholic faith is integrated with the learning process in coordination with the campus chaplain. So when Janalski sued the diocese over her termination, the question became whether the diocese could choose its ministerial leader and therefore be exempt from employment laws that would have otherwise presented a legal burden to the school. The court found Janalski to meet the definition of minister, and that the diocese was entitled to use the same ministerial exception that permits churches and other religious organizations to ensure its ministry is not hindered by those it believes may not fully advance its ministry objectives. Religious freedom means that religious ministries should be able to direct their religious mission, which includes staffing decisions, without interference by the state. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour today, we spent some time talking with James Anderson, and then in the second hour, we spent some time talking with Todd Starnes. But if you'd like to join us real quickly, we'll take some of those phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. And I thought I might just mention for a minute some of the other issues that we need to put on the program. By the way, tomorrow we'll have Jerry Newcomb joining us in the second hour, and he has been a commentator for many years with Coral Ridge Ministries, and we'll also have an open line to get into some of these other issues. But I thought for just a minute, since the Pope just recently spoke on the subject of Muslim terrorism, and we did talk about that briefly with Todd Starnes, that I would come back to this. And frankly, whenever the Pope speaks, it doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic or not, his worldwide influence is quite considerable. And so that's why we need to pay attention to his words. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned by a few of the comments that have come out from his speech. One in particular in which he was really trying to maybe downplay this idea of Muslim terrorism. He said, and I'm quoting from the Pope, Christian terrorism does not exist, Jewish terrorism does not exist, and Muslim terrorism does not exist. Now, if his point was simply to say that all Christians are not terrorists, all Muslims are not terrorists, well, that's sort of obvious. That's sort of one of those self-evident facts. But he really seemed to be arguing, as a matter of fact, a little bit later in his speech, about the fact that the reason we have terrorism is because of economic inequality rather than religious beliefs. And first of all, that's not really true, but even so, it might come as a surprise to some of the wealthy, even well-educated radical Muslim leaders. Just think of the money that Osama bin Laden had and others that we can mention. And also think about some of the oil-rich regions that have been state sponsors of terrorism. So, that may be true for some of those who are the, if you will, the ground troops of terrorism. But these ideas go all the way up to some of the highest levels. And he also went on to say that all religions promote peace. And it's just those few individuals that take a religion in the wrong direction. Here's another quote from the Pope. He said, "There are fundamentalist and violent individuals in all peoples and religions, and with intolerant generalizations, they become stronger because they feed on hate and xenophobia, which is the fear of outsiders." And the problem is that we do have moderate Muslims. Matter of fact, Todd Starnes in his book has a section on moderate Muslims who are peace-loving. But the fact is that they are always sort of hampered because these radical terrorist Muslims can point to verses in the Quran and also point to the life of Muhammad to justify their terrorist actions. So let's just face it, our world today is not dealing with Christian terrorists or Jewish terrorists. Our world today is dealing with what? Muslim terrorists. And even, by the way, even if you did have a Christian terrorist, we could point to all sorts of verses in the Bible to actually condemn those actions. But Islam does not find itself in that same situation. We have to obviously come back to one of the obvious statements, and that is not all Muslims are terrorists. A very small percentage are, but nearly all terrorists are Muslims. And radical Muslim leaders are quoting from the Quran to justify their actions. They're pointing to the life of Muhammad to really begin to call for them to emulate the lifestyle of the leader of Islam. So I guess I'm just a little concerned about a statement that said there are no Muslim terrorists. Muslim terrorists do not exist. We have to be honest enough to not to go to one extreme and say that all Muslims are terrorists, but I don't think we are helped by going to the other extreme and say that there are no Muslim terrorists. I mean, it doesn't make sense either way. Anyway, we'll get to those phone calls in just a minute, but one of the things that we want to also focus on is some of the concern that people have had about what is happening in the Trump administration. Because in the Wall Street Journal, it says, after issuing a blizzard of executive orders that fueled expectations, he would be a dominant force in Washington. Now it seems like, as they are saying, that Mr. Trump, or President Trump, risks seeming like Gulliver, the giant tied down by an army of resilient, if smaller, adversaries. They go on to say that the anti-Trump resistance has helped block his immigration policy, slow his health care agenda and cabinet nominees, force out a top advisor and a cabinet choice, and make many of his public appearance occasions for raucous protest. And so the editors of the Wall Street Journal say that the scope of opposition to Mr. Trump is remarkable for a new president. They say others have faced protest and legal disputes, but none of the magnitude and persistence that Donald Trump or President Trump has encountered so early in his presidency. They go on in the editorial to say that even George W. Bush, who took office after an emotionally contested election decided by the Supreme Court, didn't face massive street protests the day after his inauguration or immediate legal challenges to his executive actions and such extensive attempts to block his cabinet nominations. They go on to say that Mr. Trump this weekend is escaping and this was written just a day or two ago, the Washington battlefield for his seaside mansion in Florida, and was, of course, holding a political rally in Melbourne, Florida. And even there, wasn't it interesting, because the rally begins with his wife, the First Lady, Melania Trump, quoting from what? She calls everyone to follow her in saying what? The Lord's Prayer. And that has now become controversial as well. But he goes on to say that during the general election race, Donald Trump faced a single adversary, Hillary Clinton. Now he's up against a federal bureaucracy, including many who are opposed to his efforts, Democrats in Congress, media he has called a tweet an enemy of the American people, and a nationwide network of liberal activists who have been mobilized by his presidency in a way that they weren't by his campaign. So again, one of the reasons we wanted to once again encourage you to take an action item today is to recognize some of the pressures that are on the Trump administration just a month into this administration. So again, he's signed a number of executive orders, and those are ones to address all sorts of different issues. But one of the most significant ones still is awaiting his signature, and that is the one having to do with religious liberty. This is the last time we're going to post this, because tomorrow we're going to move on to some other action items. So let me just again remind you, as we talked about just a minute ago, what happened in the Washington State Supreme Court, in which that particular court unanimously ruled against the florist Baronelle Stutzman simply because she decided not to do a floral arrangement for a same-sex commitment ceremony. She, of course, is just the latest victim of discrimination simply because of her religiously held Christian beliefs. So again, this is why we encourage you to take some action, and we have made it very easy for you to do so. All you need to do is go to the website, pointofview.net, click on the button that says Take Action Now, ask President Trump to sign the religious order. As you go there, we have an opportunity for you to look at our suggested letter or email, and if you would like to make some changes, you can certainly do so. It simply talks about the executive order to protect religious freedom that was leaked to the press and that you believe that it should be actually signed. And so we give you that opportunity to make any modifications. You put your name and address down there, and we will then send that off, and that will be the action item for today. Starting tomorrow, we'll move into some other topics that we will be addressing in terms of our action items. So we encourage you to let your opinions be known, not only to your members of Congress and to the president, but as we open up the phones, we'll give you that opportunity as well. We will have an open line tomorrow in the first hour, so we'll get into some of these news items in more detail, and then we'll have a chance to hear from our friend Jerry Newcomb. I want to thank Doug and Catherine and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track, and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.